keeping with my Jewish tradition, we often start with this song, which is Shalom Haverim, which is kind of welcome everyone. So since we're sitting here silently, this may have been something you've heard before. It goes Shalom Haverim, Shalom Haverim, Shalom, Shalom. Lehitraot, Lehitraot, Shalom, Shalom. So it's just a very common way when a group of Jewish people get together. It's not religious, although it's in Hebrew. It's something we commonly sing when a group of friends get together. And it's just, it's good to see everybody, and we'll see each other again soon. It's often sung at the beginning of a gathering. A lot of young people sing it at camp. It's often sung at the end of a gathering. But hopefully part of this is sharing knowledge, but sharing maybe just a little bit of culture. So I think that may have been our 60 seconds, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Before I hand it over to you, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that beautiful song. I'm a little bit familiar with it, with the melody there. So thank you so much on behalf of everybody in the room. Before I do hand it over to our speaker, I just wanted to provide a little bit of information about the organization, as well as our presenter today. Just starting off with, on behalf of Sound Vision, I wanted to thank everyone for their time to coming into this session. Just to keep in mind that Sound Vision is an educational organization that provides a lot of webinar as well as workshop opportunities for people across the United States as well as Canada. Just keeping in mind that we do have a Q&A box as well as a chat function that you are more than welcome to tap into if you have any questions or comments about the presentation. And lastly, just to keep in mind that we are administrating a poll somewhere within the presentation. So just a heads up for that. The way that you would participate is directly within the poll, just for best results. And a little bit about our presenter before I hand it over, where it looks like we're just on time. So Anne Rosenfield is the director of the Hillborn charity e-news, as well as being a frontline fundraiser. She does happen to have over 20 years of experience within the field of fundraising, and she has won awards such as the Mo Davies Award for Excellence in Small Organizational Fundraising twice, as a matter of fact, and she is both an executive director as well as a board member of the organization. So thank you so much. Just keeping all of our points in mind about the question time, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to go right ahead and share, get started, and talk a little bit, and I'm going to encourage you, if you have questions, I'm going to pause. I'll probably do the first like 2 slides and then I'll pause.
Sure.
And feel free to put questions in the chat, both questions that you find useful about what is it about Jewish fundraising that can be helpful to you, as well as if you have, cultural questions about Jewish fundraising. So the first thing I want to, oh, now my, come on, slides. I was so happy that, yay. Okay.
We can see your screen, you're good to go.
Great, no, I couldn't get the slides to advance, so, and now I know how to do that.
Okay, great.
We're all learning as we go. So I believe you have a similar word. The word in Judaism that we translate for charity in English, which is an imperfect translation, is the word tzedakah. And tzedakah is an interesting word because the root of the word tzedakah is tzedek, which is righteous. So you may have heard in, there is the Walk of Righteous Gentiles. So after the Holocaust, people who had aided, supported Jews during the Holocaust, there is a place, and there's and it's got the word tzedek in it. So a righteous person is a tzedek. And one way to understand tzedakah is less that it's about charity or generosity, which I think of as being more of a Christian thought. Lori probably talked a bit about this yesterday. Tzedakah is more about justice or about fairness. So that's a pretty central point. I'm just going to look here. Are there any questions, or shall I go on?
I think it's just a lot of people kindly echoing your words of shalom and welcome in Hebrew. Otherwise, we're good to go. What I will do is I will periodically jump in with any questions just as they start to trickle in. But thank you for checking.
Great. So bear this mind about righteousness in, and this, as we warned you, there's going to be a poll. Just in case your screen's acting up, or some people may have visual impairment and they won't be able to see. There's a famous Jewish scholar from the Middle Ages named Maimonides. Okay, I can't answer that question, but I'm hoping someone else can. I know Imam Irshad, we have you on the line. So is Tzedakah and Tzedakah, would you say those are similar? Sorry, I dragged you into the presentation.
No,
would you say those are similar concepts?
Yep, no, that's what I'm here for. No worries at all. Yes, they are. And Imam Irshad is also agreeing on the chat as well. Great question.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. So in terms of Tzedakah, Moses Maimonides from the Middle Ages had 8 categories of Tzedakah, and you're going to take a poll, and I'm hoping that you don't guess because he actually ranked them. And so the list here is outside of ranked order. So the question is, what's the highest form of tzedakah? What's the highest form of giving? And we've got when the donor gives less than is fitting, but gives willingly or gives with a smile. The recipient knows the identity of the donor, but the donor doesn't know who got the gift. Anonymous gift, where the donor and receivers do not know the identity of each other. The recipient and donor know each other's identity, but the gift is given without being requested. A business partnership job or a no-interest loan. A gift where the donor knows identity of the recipient, but the recipient doesn't know who is the donor. So start thinking about how you're going to think which one of these is the most important, because we're about to do the poll. The gift is less fitting, and the donor gives unwillingly. And the recipient and the donor know each other, but the recipient has to ask for the gift. So I know the poll has been posted. So you're just going to take a moment here and fill in the poll, which I believe you can see, correct?
I think this is a great opportunity just to remind everyone to participate in the poll directly. So on your screen in the bottom center, there's just a function that says poll. That would be the best way to participate. I'm getting a few people saying that they can't see the poll. Let me know in your screen, like on the bottom bar, like where it says chat, if there should be a button that says poll. Okay, someone's saying it's not there. Okay, what we'll do is I'm just going to jump on a call with one of our co-organizers and see if we can.
You know what we could do?
Yes.
Or what we could do, just because I'm in the interest of time, if that's okay with you, I'm being a little unruly. And by the way, this Zoom bomber, ironically, yes, I'm a Jewish household this is Pharaoh the cat, who, as you can guess, I adopted from another family, and Pharaoh likes to Zoom bomb whenever there's a meeting going on. So
I don't think anyone has an issue with that. No problem at all.
I'm glad. Thank you for your support of Pharaoh. I put the poll questions up. If you look at the list, do you want to just maybe put to everyone what you think the highest form of tzedakah would be? Is it when the recipient and the giver know each other? Is it when there's a business opportunity created? Anonymous giving, so one person's saying when it's anonymous, the gift is given willingly. Pharaoh, by the way, would not give tzedakah to any of you people or me, frankly. Pharaoh is all about himself.
It's the nature of cats. Yes, go ahead. Please go ahead.
So we've got a couple of people saying anonymous giving is the highest form.
I have a question on the question. Sorry.
Sure. Ask the question on the question.
What do you mean by highest form? Is the highest amount?
No, the highest, the most virtuous or righteous.
Okay, thanks.
That's a great question. So I've got a couple of people who think anonymous. I'm sure no one's going to think that it's the gift is less than asked for. Does anyone else have any other thoughts? Otherwise, I'll let you know in just a moment. Just going to give you another chance.
What is less than fitting? Less than fitting, what does that mean?
So I'm a very wealthy person, and I could afford to give $100,000, and I give $10,000. So it's given my wealth and given what I'm capable of doing, I'm doing less than what I'm capable of doing. I think that's a great question. Oh, that's lovely. Highest donation, the one where one gives at the time when he himself needs a donation. Okay, I'm going to do one last call, and then I'm going to tell you what Maimonides said. And I love this. This is exactly the kinds of conversations we as Jews have about about these kinds of questions, about these issues. So I'm going to just close the chat box, and I'm going to go to the results based on what Maimonides said. So traditionally, this is one of the areas where Jews tend to agree. And you may or may not know, there's an old joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. But for the most part, when it comes to tzedakah, people pretty much stick with Maimonides. So Anan, I believe it was, in chat, said the job, and they're now out of order, so I can't tell you which ones you said, but a business partner job or a no interest loan, because the notion Maimonides felt really strongly is if someone is able to help themselves, then that is the highest form of tzedakah. And remember, the word tzedakah is also linked to the word righteous. So the most righteous act that you can do is to help someone be able to be self-supporting. And then if you go through the list, and I'm going to touch quickly on these points, because it's going to help understand in about 2 slides some of the things the Jewish community does, which I believe are a bit, Arshad was saying the correct synonymous term for tzedakah is zakat. So thank you for that. I'm going to pause because I'm going to move on. I just want to be sure the concept is clear of what tzedakah is, and the Maimonides ladder is also clear. So please put comments in chat, or I believe you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Both are welcome.
Yeah, hi, I have a question. Like, do you have like a set percentage that's like as part of the faith that people should be giving, like on annual basis?
You know what, that is one of those it depends questions. So thank you for asking that question. Technically, people are supposed to give between 10 and 14% of, yes, and tzedakah is more like tithe as well. So Jews, also similar to Christians, thank you for whoever just said that in chat. Jews, similar to Christians, also have the concept of tithing. It's a less well-known concept in Judaism. So I think if you asked most Jews, are you supposed to give money to charity? They would say, is it a religious obligation? They would say yes. If you ask them what the percentage would be, I suspect most Jews would not actually know that answer, in the way that my impression is that most religious Christians and even some secular Christians would actually know that it's meant to be 10 to 14%. Any other questions, either unmuting yourself or on chat?
Yeah, one more. So the 10-14% apply to the Christian faith too?
I can't speak for Lorraine Christians. I believe with Christians, it's the 10%, Iman Irshad, if you happen to know on this, please feel free to chime in or put something in chat. Off the top of my head, if I recall correctly, the 10% is biblical, so to speak. So the 10%, I believe the tithe is, I believe, in the Bible, which is why Christians and Jews would share that concept. The interpretation of that it could be up to 14%, I believe, is rabbinic. So in Judaism, we have what's in the Torah in the language, and it's in Hebrew and it's in ancient Hebrew, so it can be subject to much interpretation, which is why in Judaism, as in many faiths, we have such a broad range of practices. And as part of our faith, we have writings of the rabbis that are considered to be, have the weight of Torah, so be as important as Torah, as holy as Torah. And I believe the 10 to 14%, I believe that range, I think that's rabbinic, so given by the rabbis in conversation, not written in the Torah, if that makes sense. So I'm going to check if there's any other questions or anybody has any clarifications. Thank you for that comment. That to Islam, Tzedakah is required. Yes. So it sounds, if I'm understanding the connection correctly, in terms of zakat and tzedakah, yes, tzedakah is a requirement of Judaism. Judaism has what we call 613 mitzvot, which mean commandments, and tzedakah is one of them. And one of your goals as a Jew is to fulfill as many of the 613 as you're able to. Okay, so I'm gonna, feel free, I'm just gonna move on, and then you are free to ask more questions. So I believe because of this notion of tzedakah, there are two things that are quite common in the Jewish community, and I find common in immigrant or refugee communities, but I don't find them to be broadly common in Canada. So we have in different major, Abdul, that is a great question. Can you either unmute yourself, or can you clarify? Because I don't, so who's entitled to give tzedakah in Judaism? I'm not sure I understand your question fully. I will say everybody, there certainly is some stuff in the Torah, which the Torah is what the Christians call the Old Testament, where everybody is expected to give something. And so in fact, one of the things that can happen with tzedakah is even the poorest are expected to give tzedakah. So if you have a bit more and you give tzedakah to a poor person, you may give them a little bit extra so that they can turn around and also give tzedakah themselves. So it's considered an obligation of all Jews. And there's a part in the Torah that I really love where they talk about if you can sacrifice this, you know, if you're wealthy and you can sacrifice, and I can't remember what it is because I'm not a rabbi and I don't maybe study as much as I should, but you know, you can give, I think it's a goat, and if you can't afford a goat, you can give this kind of an animal, and if you can't afford this, you can give a bird, and then I think it's that even the poorest could give, you know, a bird or two small birds. So everybody has an obligation to tzedakah, but we also have an obligation to help people who don't have the personal means to give tzedakah so that they can participate. And this goes back to that idea of 613 mitzvot. So you, our goal as Jews is to try to participate in all of them, or as many of them as we're able to. And since tzedakah is one of the mitzvot, we want to provide people with the means to be able to care for them, to be able to participate in that obligation as well. So, so keep asking these questions. I'm going to go back to the slide, but keep asking these questions because I'm learning from you, and I hope you're learning from me. So communities have organized free loan societies. We have one in Toronto. There are several scattered across Canada. There are many across North America. And the idea is it's a self-help society. So if, and the Jewish free loan or Hebrew free loan, they're often called, has suddenly very much come into the front and center of the Jewish community. It's been kind of one of those quiet programs that's existed in many communities like Toronto for probably over 100 years. And as you can see, it's interest-free loans for emergencies and a variety of emergencies, including, you know, personal living and medical, Jewish life cycle. So this would really be, I imagine this is true actually of all faith communities. If someone doesn't have, if someone's lost a family member and they don't have the money to be able to pay for a proper burial, that it supports things like that, but it can also support people going in university. Or as you can see, this ties all the way back to the previous slide. You can see interest-free loans can be to start a business. And so in the previous slide, you see how the highest form of tzedakah is giving people their start so that they don't need to rely on what I think in a Christian term might call charity. So I'm going to pause for a minute on this free loan question to see if you have any question about that. I know that many, I know, for example, in the Chinese community, there are also sort of what I think in Canadian they call self-help societies. So maybe everyone came from the same village or neighborhood. So that's a free loan society. Abdul is asking an awesome question about who deserves tzedakah in Judaism. And once again, I don't think, because I work in fundraising, I've actually studied this a lot. I'm not sure the average person knows that. There is a there's rabbinic conversations on everything. One of the interesting rabbinic conversations is if someone asks you for money for food, you are absolutely obligated to give it to them, no matter how they're dressed, no matter how fancy their house is, no matter how expensive their car is. If someone says to you, will you please give me money for lunch? Will you please, when I see homeless people on the street, if they say to me, spare change for food, I am, even if their jar maybe has, I don't know, what looks like $20 in it or something, so that would be enough to probably buy them, you know, a lunch and maybe even a dinner at like Tim Hortons or something. If they say spare change for food, I am absolutely obligated to give them money. For other things, I don't feel like I know enough of an answer to that question to be able to answer. I wonder if, I'm going to go back to the highest form of tzedakah slide. Feel free also, as my moderator, nudge me on if I'm going way too much far into the detail. I think that's why.
No, not at all. You're good to go. It's quite fascinating, and I just want to thank everyone for their also equally very interesting questions coming in. So no worries about that. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No. I appreciate that. Like, you know, I could kind of go on this forever. So I think just quickly doing, I'll get to Abdul's question in a minute. I'll just finish with Jamal's question as best I'm able, and then keep asking. I think that's why in Maimonides' ladder, so this is Moses Maimonides from the Middle Ages, while you'll note that the highest form is the business partnership job or no interest loan, and that obviously ties to the free loan societies. It ties to the anonymous gift. And you'll notice if you go all the way down, it's third from the bottom. So it's number 5. Recipient and donor know each other, but the recipient has to ask. So I understand your question. I guess what I'm saying from a Jewish lens, if someone has to ask, then I'm going to likely assume that I need to think about giving them the money because the community hasn't done what they needed to, right? The community hasn't offered them a free loan. Maybe a rabbi hasn't been able to facilitate a gift between each other. Somehow the community has in a little bit of a way let the person down. So that's my Jewish answer. In Canada, in terms of free loans are provided, the community puts money into the Free Loan Society, so anyone can put money into the Free Loan Society. It's in Canada, in North America, to my knowledge, only provided to individuals. I don't know of any banks that do a free loan kind of arrangement. I don't know, maybe they have it in Israel. That's not something I know about. The other thing is the free loan is truly a loan. So thank you for asking that question, Khalid. It is in fact an interest-free loan. So the person is expected to pay it back, and that's part of how they, the notion is that that's what keeps the principal intact. For a free loan through I'm only familiar with the Toronto, and I keep saying Toronto Jewish free loan, and I keep saying Hebrew free loan. Hebrew free loan would be an older, probably more like my grandparents' generation, what they would have called it, but Jewish free loan, Hebrew free loan society, all exactly the same thing. So thank you for that question. They are interest-free. They are loans. At least in Toronto, they require 2 community co-signers. And if the person, for whatever reason, doesn't repay their loan to the Jewish Free Loan Society, then one or both of the co-signers will repay so that the society continues to operate and can continue to help people. One of the things I've certainly seen, it may not be clear. I actually work for a synagogue as a fundraiser, and I've certainly seen the rabbi, if someone is known to us as a member of our congregation, but maybe not well known otherwise, that the rabbi will find 1 or 2 people to co-sign the free loan so that the person can get the money. And there was a great question. That's a great question. Can tzedakah be used for administrative costs for the synagogue? So in my synagogue, in many synagogues, we call it a tzedakah campaign, and we definitely use it in part for administration. Similar, I would think, to other faith communities. If someone is, in terms of tzedakah, like I'm talking backwards. The largest expense most people get running a synagogue is salaries for clergy. Not that they make $1 million, right? But they work, right? So tzedakah, and they're the facilitators of tzedakah. So in that context, like, please don't quote me. A rabbi may agree or not with my interpretation, but once again, as I said earlier, a standard joke in Judaism is 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So a very Jewish conversation is me saying, yes, tzedakah can be applied to administration. And another Jew might say, no, tzedakah cannot be applied to administration. And then we try to go look back at historical sources to see what have our sages, what have our rabbis and our leaders said in the past. And someone would say, well, in the Torah it says this, and it kind of goes from there. So I'm going to just look at the chat. So I'm going to go in order of the questions that have asked. How do you qualify a person eligible for a loan? Asked Anan. And I don't know the answer to that question. I believe that the Hebrew free loan, if you're interested, just Google like Jewish free loan or Hebrew free loan Toronto. It's under the umbrella of the United Jewish Appeal, UJA. And they would have information about how someone qualifies for a loan. It would be my understanding that a loan can be different from the other form of tzedakah, in that if someone can't repay it, then that might be where our rabbis often have a rabbi's discretionary fund. So if someone is very, very low income and we don't believe that that person's going to be able to repay, people often, the rabbi has a discretionary fund, and how the rabbi builds that discretionary fund is, for example, the rabbi may perform a marriage, may perform a baby naming, may perform a bar bat mitzvah, and people often in thanks will make a donation to the rabbi's discretionary fund. They'll often make a donation to the congregation to celebrate this happy moment, and they'll often make a donation to the rabbi's discretionary fund. So I think, in answer to your question, someone who qualifies for a free loan would be someone who is going to have an ability to pay it. Otherwise, there would be likely another source of money. There's a question here. I'm going to just go back that the resource of loan money are donations donations from the community. So that's what the source of the free loan is. And then the last question is, that's a great question about sinful or immoral practices. And that's a long conversation for us, as I think it is for every faith community. I'm going to say, so there's a Jewish expression, standing on one foot, which is kind of quickly off the top of my head. So standing on one foot, if something is legal, generally, I believe that most Jewish communities would accept the money. So it's more around, so some people might consider, for example, gambling illegal. There are people who consider gambling immoral, but it is it's legal. Like, you win the lottery, that's, the government sponsors it, that's legal. That's legal gambling, basically. And I believe most synagogues would say, well, it's legal, we're likely okay with it, but that would be a super, like, I feel like I could imagine that being a very long conversation. I'm going to just check. I feel like we've covered free loans well, and I want to get through the whole presentation. Fortunately, I don't have a ton of slides, and we have some case studies. The other thing that I think is a bit different in the Jewish community are what are called federations. So you may have heard of United Jewish Appeal, UJA, and in Quebec, it's the same thing. It's Fédération de, I don't know what it is in French. So it's very similar as an idea to the United Way. So the federation model is a model where charities all, the Jewish community raises money all together, all at one time, and then redistributes the money, but it only goes to Jewish social service charities, Jewish hospitals. So it doesn't go to synagogues, but it goes to those other Jewish organizations. And the reason I wanted to kind of note that, so I can have donors at my synagogue. For example, at my synagogue, one of our board members is on the board of Free Loan. I'm sure, lots of donors who give money to Free Loan. I also have lots of people who are members of the synagogue who also give to Federation, and they also give to the synagogue. Plus they may do other charitable gifts. So the Federation is just another way the Jewish community is organized to help out. As I say, it doesn't affect synagogues, but to give just some specific examples, one thing to note is synagogues are quite different from churches in that we don't tend to run social services out of synagogues. So like a kosher food bank is generally run, it's its own organization. Programs for elderly people is like the Bernard Battelle Center, it's its own organization. A Jewish theater company, it's its own organization. So all those things are not run out of synagogues. They're run as their own, usually as their own charities. And that's what the Federation pays for. And then I'm going to, a little bit out of order, but referring back, just so that you guys have been great in chat. I thought I was going to have to do things to get you to chat. But just for fun, does anyone know why the numbers 18 or 36 are important in Jewish giving? Imam Irshad's not allowed to reply because he and I have already had this conversation.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do you know why the number 18 and the number 36 are important in Jewish giving?
Other than that, 36 divided by 2 is 18. I don't know.
You're actually onto something there. So very quickly, the number for life in Hebrew, we don't use Arabic numerals, we use letters, and the number 18 is also the word for life. So the number 18 is the word for life, and 36 is double chai, because the word for life is chai, and you've heard l'chaim as a toast. So double chai is 36. So when I was referring earlier to life cycle events, and moments where maybe someone gives money to the rabbi for the rabbi's discretionary fund, which the rabbi can then do to give probably more what we would conventionally think of in Canadian terms as charity, to help someone out who maybe needs money for food, who maybe needs money for their rent. That money goes into the rabbi's discretionary fund. We as a Jewish community have landed on the numbers 18 and 36 as being proper or appropriate numbers. So someone may give $18 or $180 or, $3,600 as a way of, it's a way of showing gratitude and also a way of supporting life. So my hope in talking to you today, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more directly about synagogue stuff in a moment, is my hope is by letting you know about the notion of tzedakah, the Free Loan Society, the federations, and rabbis' discretionary funds. they may be things you already do, or they may be things that you can sort of export from Judaism, including you may or may not have numbers that particularly signify good things. But those at least are common milestones in the Jewish tradition. So the last thing, and then we're going to go to a case study. And I hope I'm not quite sure why my screen was blinking like that. Did you have a question, or you just, did your cat Pharaoh unmute? Okay. I wasn't sure if someone else had a cat unmuting them. So the other thing, so I've already talked about kind of tzedakah. I've talked about how one way Jewish communities support those who are in financial need is free loans. I've talked about how federations are a way they support particularly our social services and our cultural groups. And I've talked about Rabbi's discretionary fund, and I've talked about the numbers 18 and 36. So one of the things that I think is very different about synagogues, certainly in North America, and I don't know if this is true around the world, is synagogues have formal membership, and people actually pay dues to be a member of a synagogue. We have a strong tradition in Judaism that you don't carry money on the Sabbath, and you don't carry money on religious holidays. So it's always weird to me when I go to it, I've been lucky that a friend has invited me to go to church sometimes with them. And I'm there sitting in a pew on a Sunday, and they're passing a plate around, and people are putting money in the plate. Or I understand from Lori, now sometimes churches have places where you can tap or debit in the church and somewhere. And I never remember to bring money with me to a church, although I would have my debit card, because Jews aren't supposed to handle money at all on the Sabbath. And so the most common times where we're going to be together as a community are going to be Friday night and Saturday morning for our Sabbath, and for the Jewish high holidays, which are our biggest moments. And so we can't have cash. We're not supposed to have cash on us. We're not supposed to have, debit or credit cards on us. So the way synagogues manage this is we have formal membership, which sounds funny because usually you think of membership as being, the gym or maybe an art museum. You don't think of membership as being a congregation. So we have membership, and it is in relative terms, it's what I would say informally, it's a real amount of money. So different synagogues have different systems. The two most common are either everybody pays the same amount of dues, and those who can afford more pay more. That model, which is called a fair share model, is often about $1,500, around that range, for each family. So whether your family has one person or your family has 5 people, your family will be paying $1,500 to be a member for a year. The other model is people have these complicated situations where people pay a bit of money to be a member, and basically the more money that you make to a certain level, the more dues you pay. So in that situation, you will still likely have people paying, even at the lowest, the smallest dues category, people are often paying, let's say, $500. So it's still, if you're someone making $20,000 or $30,000 a year, $500 is a lot of money to you. And then at the top, it could be that someone may be paying $4,000 or $5,000 a year in dues. So the question you're going to have, and the answer I'm going to say is yes, is I know, for example, the synagogue where I am, we have 200 people who pay not $1 in dues. They're very low income. They're maybe living in long-term care and are, not able to participate anymore in the life of the synagogue in their way. Clergy will still visit them, talk to their family, but they're no longer active. So what that dues does is it helps support the synagogue, and it also means the one thing that you may have heard Jewish people talk about are high holiday tickets. So your membership gets you high holiday tickets, and for reasons both of security, because we have the same worries, unfortunately, about security. I think that is something Jews have more in common with Muslims, about being worried about safety in our congregations. So partly for security and partly to help keep the organization going, you have to have paid your dues to be high holiday, in order to get high holiday tickets. The answer to the question, when you're traveling, you absolutely can visit other synagogues. And it's the case in Toronto. Many people will, even if you're a member of a synagogue, even if you pay dues there, it's common people might, for example, in the summer, go, even in Toronto, I've done this just for fun, go to services at other congregations just to check it out, just to see what it's like at another place, because we're rich in Toronto with having many congregations with many practices. Great question. The Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah is a 2-day holiday, usually in September, and 10 days later it's followed by Yom Kippur. So if you've ever noticed your Jewish coworkers, or you may notice this now going forward, all of a sudden your Jewish coworkers seem to just like not be there for kind of 2 weeks. It's because of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are called the high holidays. And for the high holidays, you need to have a ticket in order to get into a synagogue, for the reasons I described, both in terms of helping make sure the synagogue has support, and also making sure, for some safety reasons. But tickets for the high holidays, also because we get such a huge volume of people coming to services, that we often on the high holidays, so high holidays being the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and the 1 day of Yom Kippur, we often have to have maybe 4 services in a day to make sure my congregation where I am has about 1,600 families. Some families are a group of 1, but some families are a group of 4 or 5. So to fit that many people in our sanctuary, we have, often we'll have an 8 a.m. service, an 11 a.m. service, maybe a 1:30 service, and a 4 o'clock service. So that way everybody gets into the building, and their tickets let them know which time they're able to go. So I'm going to pause right now, because next I believe we're going to have our case study. So this is a great question. Because of coronavirus, so 2 questions. On I'm going to ask the easier question first. The number of members of a congregation of a synagogue is very mixed. In Jewish tradition, you are required to have 10 adults in order to worship. So you're not actually required to have a rabbi, but you are required to have 10 adults. An adult is anyone age 13 or older. In traditional Jewish faith, that's 10 men. In more liberal Jewish faith, and I'm a liberal Jew, it's 10 adults. So there are congregations that can be as small as 10 or 20, and they're meeting in someone's living room. There are congregations as large. There are some congregations in New York City that have 5,000 and 6,000 family units. In Toronto, I think you're more going to be seeing a range of 800 to 1,200 if they have a building. So if a synagogue has a building that's a separate building that's maintained, there's probably at least 800 people that are members of that congregation. If they have had Jews, or many of the Jewish community arrived in Canada in the early 1900s. So there may be small congregations and they own a building and they own their land. So they're able to keep going with maybe a part-time rabbi because they don't have as many expenses. But there are also Jewish congregations that have, have just done renovations or have larger properties that maybe have a mortgage. So it varies. And I'm just going to see, there was one other chat question. And I'm so glad you asked the COVID question. And let me see, I just want to see what my next slide is. Okay, I'm going to kind of start with the case study and answer this question. So actually, I'm going to unshare and I'm going to show you, sorry, stop share. I'm going to show you, this is going to be a little funny. What are people doing right now in terms of synagogues is a great question, and it's actually a hard question. Because the question then becomes, depending on when you do your membership drive, as you can gather, many synagogues probably get 90% of their income from doing their annual membership renewal. And that kind of makes sense if we're talking amounts like $500, $1,000, and if you're lucky you've got several people at $4,000 and $5,000, then that annual membership renewal is really going to be important to you as a congregation. And so one of the things my colleagues and I work as a fundraiser, and there are other Jewish fundraisers in similar congregations around the US, is we've been really talking about how we can provide worship and service and stay connected to our congregants so then they will renew their membership as well as give. So right now we're doing more, and Imam Irshad really described this beautifully, talking about stewardship. But I'm going to talk about, because I think worship comes first and steward at first. So at my congregation, we're streaming a short 15 minutes every morning with the rabbi. And that makes sure that people have a chance to see him, and it lets us be sure that every day we can do the prayer for healing for everyone that's ill, and we do a prayer for everyone who's died in the last 30 days, and that's a part of our, that's an important part of our culture. In Jewish culture, when I was talking about the rabbi's discretionary fund, it's not required, but it is often the way. So let me be clear. I'm sure that rabbis are doing this everywhere because it's the right thing for the community, right? So it's not like people are like, oh, this is how I'm going to get money. It is common, though, because we keep those prayers up, one of the things that's connected with those prayers, people often make some donation. But so there's been that piece of getting the worship up and going. We also teach religious school, getting our school up on Zoom, and then also doing some, we also do adult education. We may do adult study classes. And then we just had the holiday of Passover. So I have, it's going to be a little weird. I'm going to put it up on my screen in this form, which is going to be a little bit funny. And it's particularly funny because I've got my background on. How do I make this go? Yes, there. I'm actually going to turn my background off so that you can see this. So what we did, this is not my synagogue, it's another synagogue, and this is really hard to see. But what they did is, because Passover is a big holiday for us, and it's a family holiday, but it's usually a congregational holiday. They sent a whole list of things to congregants about things that you can do with your family for the holiday of Passover, because you're not going to be able to come to services. Like, we'll still have services, but they'll be online. But it won't be the same experience for your kids. It won't be the same experience. So they did this, which I thought you might find interesting. The other thing this congregation did, and I thought it was excellent, so I made a point of, but you said blacked it out so you would see who it was. It's not the congregation I work, but I think these guys did a great job. They listed, here's all the things that we're doing. And Imam Irshad last weekend had shown a similar example of an email that a congregation had sent out, and they're like, we're having Zoom worship every day, and our school's on Zoom, and here's classes you can do. Like all the things that we're doing. The Jewish community is doing very similar things. As I say, the only thing that's different is because we had our holiday of Passover. And then the last one, as you can tell, I just got this recently. When they did their online education offerings, because one of the things someone asked Laura yesterday was about volunteers. And what I wanted to note is on this part, which you can't see, but I wanted you to see, like, it's a long list, and this is a big congregation, but right on this part right here, these three are another Jewish organization is offering these educational offerings. So they're saying, hey, here's a chance to do some study on, one's on, it's on Jewish humor, so it's talking about Jerry Seinfeld. One's on a particular part of the Torah called Vayikra, and one's on Jewish medical ethics. So one of the things that at least this congregation has done is they've not only provided, I'm sure every congregation is on Zoom right now, but what they've also done is I thought was smart, is they have also looked at what are other Jewish organizations doing that we can then benefit from. My thinking, speaking as a fundraiser, is, but once again, we have the opportunity of, we don't generally do our membership renewals until July. So this, unlike Christian churches where I know Easter's a really big holiday for them, but they do get some regular revenue each year, our big chunk, most synagogues' big chunk is usually we're starting to renew people in September. So that's going to be our moment. So what we're doing right now is we're stewarding people. So calling up congregants, how are you doing? How's it going? We developed a resource list if people need it. Not that we would do, because I remember I talked about how Jewish Federation gives grants to help for food banks, gives grants to help for, seniors programs. So we're referring people out to those organizations, so helping them stay connected to us, but connecting them within the greater Jewish community. Jews have been in Toronto for about 100 years, and so we have a quite strong network of services. So it's not just the synagogue, it's also the free loan, it's also social service agency, Federation. There's a lot of places. So there's a pull in terms of financial support, but then there's also more infrastructure in place to help support people. So I'm going to show you, because I'm conscious that Ramadan's coming up soon. And this is based partly on what Irshad, Imam Irshad, pardon me for being informal. I knew him as Irshad before I knew he was an imam. So I forget to give him his absolutely important respect of his title. So Imam Irshad talked last week about, and I kind of held up a paper example, but he had an email example last week of a Muslim congregation. He had a paper, Muslim congregation sent an email saying, here's all the things that we've been doing. So streaming and Zoom school, like things that I was also talking about. Here's all the ways you can get ready for Ramadan. What I wanted to do was also give you some concrete examples of things that maybe you could do with your faith community or your supporters. You'll notice, so this is truly and literally, and we're going to go into groups here in just a moment. And what I'm going to ask you to think about, this is, I think, an excellent example of what one of my colleagues is doing in terms of their high holiday renewals. So as I say, that's a time which I would imagine might be similar for you in terms of Ramadan, that Ramadan's a time when a lot of your donations come in. So that for us is our high holiday time. That's really when we do our membership. So you may not have membership, but what we have in common, I think, is that it's a time when there's a lot. There's a lot of activity, and it's very financially important. So what my colleague's doing, as you can see here, is they're sending out an email to all the members of their congregation to remind them to renew their membership. But the part I thought was interesting is they had picked the top 100 out of 1,100 members to check to see if they can pay the same amount. And you can see, like, they've done the math for what percentage of their overall budget these people account for. And then you can also see they've identified some other people who, and this gets back a little bit to our conversation about what is fitting. Other people who maybe they feel like could give more, and maybe in the past they have not given more, or maybe people who, you know, they may be in a business. Gosh, if any of us have the person in any of our congregations who was the inventor of Zoom, someone was telling me just moments ago that that guy in 1 month is now worth whatever he was worth. He's now worth $2 billion. If you had him in your congregation, I'm sure you would be asking him to make a really large gift. And then you'll see under point number 4 that they have made a decision at their congregation to do a little bit of that work that maybe more traditionally has been done through the Jewish Free Loan Society, through local social services, and maybe through a rabbi's discretionary fund. And then you saw the government grant. So what I'd like you to think about in this, and I'm gonna break us into breakout groups, is if you can think about and talk about in your breakout groups, who it might, how many, because, you know, I'm lucky and my congregation's lucky to have a full-time fundraiser, me. But if you can think about your congregation, how many outreach phone calls could you do? And maybe that, whether that's you or that's your imam or that maybe your board members, you know, could you reach 5 people? Could you reach 10 people? Yes, thank you. And a reminder to please feel free to keep this, this note. So I'm going to invite you to go into breakout groups now for maybe, let's say, about like 7 or 8 minutes, and talk about, you know, kind of talk through how many people could you personally connect with. And it doesn't have to be 100. This is an organization that has an executive director and a full-time fundraiser. I don't believe most of you have a full-time executive director and a full-time fundraiser, but with your limited resources, how many people do you think you could reach? So I'm going to invite my lovely colleague here to move you into groups.
Okay, our presenter is back, and mostly everybody has joined back in. I think, Anne, your microphone might be off just presently. Yeah, that's okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the reminder.
It's no problem at all. I'm still actually waiting for around maybe 15 more people just to accept that prompt on their screen. Otherwise, we're good to go with a full house. If you want to resume, you certainly can.
Sure, thank you. So I didn't know if people want to put in the comments, if you started to have an idea of how many people you think that you can reach out to. And it was interesting in our group, we had a large human rights organization that actually has staff. And I was also noting, you know, if you're we had a religious school. So there's a wide range of organizations, which makes sense. And there's also a wide range, whether you have, in the case of this one organization, 30,000 supporters and staff, that's still, like, you're not going to be able to probably phone 30,000 people. And if you've got, you know, a congregation of 500 and maybe a part-time imam with board, you're not going to maybe be able to phone everyone. That's just going to happen. Did anyone have any other questions about numbers or any thoughts about numbers they wanted to share with the whole group? So I'm just going to note in talking to Sadak and Wahid, who are part of a large organization, Wahid was commenting, and I'm finding this in my work as well, that it's much, I would really encourage you, and this is something that Imam Irshad had talked about last week. So I keep referring to him because I believe many of you were on that webinar, and I also believe he gave very sound advice. I think there's two things. One is people are at home and they're isolated, and Wahid was talking about how in calling people, the calls may take a bit longer, but because people aren't traveling, you can reach them. And it's an opportunity to have a more personal relationship. And I have someone in our congregation that I called, and she's not, she's a very private person. We ended up having a 15-minute conversation. It turns out she loves Broadway plays. And I now feel like I love Broadway plays too. We now have a connection. I now have something I can talk to her about. If we decide to do some music programming, she might be someone I call. Like you're going to want to make these calls to make connections. The other reason why you want to make these calls, and that's similar to, I'm going to just go back to my share screen and get us back to the slide so we can think about this together. These, the reasons our organizations are important, they are still going to be important after COVID is just a distant memory and we've all packed our masks into boxes. So whether you're a congregation, whether you're a human rights organization, whether you're a religious school, whatever it is you're doing, that's still going to be important. I think the challenge for us right now is, I believe most of us on this call we're not a hospital. We may not be a frontline social service in the same way, although I imagine many of you may be providing some kind of financial support to members of your congregation who don't maybe otherwise have the means to pay their rent this month or to pay their food. So as you can see in this case study, which I've shared back with you on screen, whether it's 100 people you can call, whether it's 5 people you can call, whether it's 10 people you can call, the more people you can call, especially in that higher category, and I'm sorry, I forget the name of the person, but one of the gentlemen in our group was talking about from their religious school, talking about to some of the people who have more ability to give. You know, religious school is still going to be important. In fact, in many ways, we might argue it's more important now, but it's definitely going to be important a year from now. But if you're reaching out to those people now, telling them if you're financially stable, that you're financially stable, finding out how they're doing, building that relationship, it's really going to benefit you. Now, someone had asked this question and I'm sort of coming back to it. One of the things I think is going to be helpful in these conversations is, so this slide is an example of all the things that at least my congregation is currently doing. The thing I wanted to note, and I'll just kind of touch on this and then I'll move on. I mentioned to you that one of the things that's interesting and complicated in Judaism is because we don't touch money on the Sabbath, right? So we have this whole membership model. The thing that's interesting and complicated is we don't traditionally believe in using any technology also on the Sabbath or Jewish holidays. So that has gone from, you know, only very liberal congregations having digital services, because it goes back to a belief that you don't light a fire. And so we view electricity as being fire. So we've gone as a congregation all the way from, we never stream services, and now we're streaming all our services, which in the past, so it's kind of an interesting moment in the Jewish community to have this change. And I'm sure we'll all find other changes. But what I wanted to harken back to, and I've mentioned it before, but I thought it was excellent, was when Imam Irshad, you may want to do an email to those, all members, even those you can't phone, because we're kind of very email heavy. Imam Irshad last week had an excellent example of, here's all the things that our community, you know, here's all the things that our mosque has been doing. And it talked about phoning members and streaming services and Zoom school. It talked about all these things. You can see my synagogues doing very similar things. But it's a reminder, like, we're still here for you, right? Because people want to know in this time that you're still available to them. Now, our next exercise, we're going to stay together on. But I just want to talk about, in my congregation, we actually did a call out because one of the questions that came up evidently yesterday and last week was, what if you're largely volunteer based? So if you're doing a situation similar to this, here's all the things we're doing for you email. As part of that, you may want to do here's some ways in which we could also use some volunteer help. One of the things we're finding at my congregation where I work, and I'm speaking for myself, not them, that's why I'm not using their name. But there are people volunteering who, we've had over 100 volunteer to make phone calls. Some of those people are not what you might call the usual suspects. Some of those people are not the people who usually put up their hand to volunteer. So that's been really great, but that might be a way. I find often I volunteer a lot, and whether it's the Toronto Fringe Festival or it's the Annex Singers where I sing, it always seems to be kind of the same 7 people doing all the volunteer work. This is a moment, if you feel comfortable, you may be able to do as one of your emails a call to ask for some volunteers for some of these tasks, and they may be able to help take some of the burden off of you. And then the only other thing I want to note, which I'm finding, it's an interesting new trend, it's brand new, is I'm also seeing this general trend towards an all volunteer Zoom call. So it's an opportunity for volunteers who maybe are used to being together, and maybe it's a way also for your new volunteers. Like, for example, if we've got 100 volunteers who are all phoning, maybe we do either a broad phone call, or I'm looking into maybe we might have one of the rabbis do a special study just for them and maybe talk about volunteerism in the Torah and why it's important as a way of thanking them. And hopefully it's a way to engage them. Because one of the things I think we want to be doing now is both looking at today and looking at a year from today. And so if you can use this time to build closer relations to your big donors, and also maybe expand your volunteers or build closer relations, you're going to be so much stronger this time next year. Now, the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you whether you pull out your phone or you pull out a piece of paper, and I think some of you may be able to do this, but I'm just going to start to talk about categories. I'm hoping you're going to take a moment and you're going to jot down, and as I say, whether it's on your phone or it's on a piece of paper, because what I'd like you to do is come out of this hopefully with some ideas about how Jewish fundraising works, and whether some things like a free loan, a discretionary fund for clergy, whether there's a movement down the road for a federation, but also what can you do right now in preparation for Ramadan. So I talked in the last case study, how many do you think you can call? So hopefully you have a sense of that. If you think about who your top 10 supporters are, so hopefully you've got your pen out or you've got your phone out. And I'm not going to ask you to share names, but I'm asking you to just kind of jot down and think about who are some of your top 10 supporters. And you might want to think about, I think often in Canada, we often think of men first, but there may be some women who could be big supporters. It may be women. Often research shows us broadly, women tend to give in groups. There's a thing in the US called giving circles. You may have a group of women who study together, who maybe they together give money to your organization or might be willing to organize something. Another group, think about top supporters. We often think about individuals, but think about, is there a group? Is there a professional association? Do all the doctors have a professional association? Do all the accountants? Is there some group that you can benefit from? You may have some of these. I talked before about in free loan, I also talked about the self-help societies. You may have a self-help society, people who are from a same countries, from a same organization. Maybe they could band together and give some money. There are a lot of community businesses that are suffering. You may have a community business. If someone's in the medical supply business, they may have extra money right now. You know, there may be some people who are not the people you usually think of. There may be people who've done fundraising for you as a group. So maybe you have a group of people that always gets together and does a small golf tournament or does a small, I don't know what, a garage sale. There may be groups who always raise money for you. You could think about them. There may be people, because often one of the things I'm always looking at is how can I take money off the bottom line? You may have someone who runs a hardware store. And so maybe for your organization, if they could do, they could give you all your light bulbs and furnace filters and whatever for a year. That's a gift in kind, is what we talk about in charity. That's an opportunity where they maybe can help you knock some budget off. And if you have large expenses, that could be great. You might also want to think about professions. I think we're thinking a lot about doctors right now. That's a profession that's on the front line and also may have more to give right now. Accountants, interestingly, often tend to be very generous. So also think about groups in terms of profession. I'm going to pause here before I go to our last case study. If anyone has any suggestions, either of groups or ways people can identify top supporters, or if people have any other ideas or advice for the group about maybe how to find or think about who to prioritize in terms of those top supporters. I'm just going to pause, and I am going to chit chat what I pause, and if you have thoughts, please put them into chat. You may or may not have seen about this 99-year-old veteran in Britain who's raised something like 5 or 10 million pounds. When you think about who your top supporters might be, just think about, do you have someone like that, maybe that you know, maybe that you don't, like, think creatively. There may be people who are possible for you. I'm not seeing anything in chat, and you've been a wonderfully chatty group. So I'm going to move to our second to last slide. This is going to be what's going to happen from here. We're going to go into groups again in just a moment. And based on some of the stuff that I've talked about, based on some of the stuff you've learned in some of the previous sessions, I'm hoping that you can come up with 3 points of things that you can do on behalf of your organization, or you can help your organization do between now and Ramadan. Thank you for the reminder about retaining the case study. But so the question that we're going to be talking about, we'll talk about this for like 7 or 8 minutes. Then what's going to happen after that, the last slide I have has some free resources available to you. And at the very end, for just our last few minutes, I'm happy to open it up about questions about the presentation. There are a couple of questions about Judaism and congregations, and I'll be happy to answer those as well. So are we ready to go into groups to talk about what are 3 things you think you could do between now and Ramadan to really help you boost your fundraising?
I think so. I think I'm going to go ahead and initiate the groups just in the interest of time. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much. See everybody in a moment.
Just a reminder to keep your eyes on the screen and to accept the prompt in order to join one of the discussion groups. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're currently just waiting on the rest of our class to rejoin the main group. In the interest of time, we've allowed around 5 minutes for the second case study discussion. Okay, welcome back. More amazing participants. I'm just waiting on a few more, as well as our presenter, to get back to the main room before we can resume. Okay, welcome back, everyone, including our presenter. And it looks like everyone kind of jumped back in right at the same time, so please feel free to proceed. And your microphone, I think, is muted once again.
It keeps muting itself, dag dirbit. So I wanted to just thank you all. I wanted to note, you know, we talked about this in our group, and I really want to note it's been the consistent, strong advice. I harken back to Iman Irshad, who talked about stewardship, and our group, we were talking about, building the personal relationship. It may be that when you talk to that person, you may find out that they've got a family situation or they've got something going on. This Ramadan may not be the year they can give, or maybe they've been really blessed. And making that, one of the people in our group was doing both phone calls. They're also sending out a paper mailing. We were also talking about, if you have social media, you may want to be encouraging people, for example, in a paper mailing. You may want to be encouraging them to like you on Facebook or follow you on Instagram, or, if you have those other platforms, you want to try to connect people up in as many ways as possible. That way they can hear good news. What I'm last going to show you is, here are 2 resources that are free. And then after this, I'm going to open it up to any questions about this, or you have questions about congregations, and I'm happy to stay over, happy to stay until, 2 or so and answer that. So I'm the editor of Hillborn Charity e-news. So it is a free subscription. And I'm taking my own advice, we are on Twitter and LinkedIn, not so active on Facebook. I do 4 fresh articles a week, and we've done topics on major gifts, on what to do with a canceled event, what to do if you have auction items donated for a fundraising event, like a lot of that information. Canada Helps, which many of you may be familiar with, it's a way to give online. If ever there was a moment where you are going to be able to learn so much about fundraising for free with excellent presenters, this is your moment. Canada Helps is doing a series of great free webinars with, and their emphasis tends to be for smaller charities, although I find their information is also helpful or useful for larger charities. But this is, thank you so much for posting that in chat. This is your moment. If you've got questions right now, I've been a fundraiser for a long time. I have lots of questions. There are lots of experts out there to help you. Thanks so much for putting those links in chat, both for Hillborn and for Canada Helps. We've got about 10 or so more minutes. I want to thank you. And I want to, there were a couple of more congregation questions I didn't have time to get into. I'm happy to answer any other questions you have about how to make your fundraising more effective for Ramadan, more questions about Jewish philanthropy, Jewish giving, or if you have just broader questions about how synagogues work, I'm happy to stay on for the next 10 or so minutes and answer any questions you might have.
Okay, I have a question about, are there any foundations or like giving grants for nonprofit organizations? Are you aware of any, like a grants? It could be for religious, could be for educational, specifically targeting nonprofit organizations.
That's a great question. There are organizations that provide, there are charitable foundations. There are a lot more in the US than there are in Canada. And I mean a lot more. There are some services. I'm thinking specifically, one's called, I don't own these companies. I don't have friends who own these companies. But there are ways to research those. There's one called Grant Connect. There's one Foundation Search, I think it's called. There's also one called iWave. I'm going to type iWave in. I'm going to actually type all these in.
Yes, please. Can you put them in the chat?
Yes. Often, oops. Often, okay, I've just put them in chat. Often you can get like a 1 month free subscription, a 1 week free subscription to kind of try it out. And I'm finding a lot of these services are being very generous right now because they have businesses to run too. So this is going to be an opportunity to maybe look at, just the only thing I would say with all these ones is often, let's say it's a week for free or it's a month for free. And what they often do is they get your credit card, and just like anything else, if you don't cancel, like if it's 30 days free membership, if you don't cancel on day 29, then they're going to charge your credit card. And so that's your responsibility to make sure you don't accidentally end up, paying for it and you meant to just take a look at it to see if it's valuable. But especially if you're a smaller organization, I think it's worth taking a look first to make sure that it makes sense for you.
Sure.
So I'm going to answer the question about salaries. Boy, that's such a good question. The average annual salary of a rabbi in Toronto. I have no idea. There is a principle in Judaism, which I think is, I don't think it's in the Torah, but I do believe it's in the rabbinic literature, that a rabbi should make around the, so we're very, very different from Christians. Christians, there's streams of Christianity that believe in clergy should make as little money as possible because that's part of their service. There's a Jewish concept, and once again, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So if you had a different Jew here, they would totally disagree with me on this. There's a concept in Judaism that the rabbi is an exalted member of the community, and so the rabbi should make what not like the least amount possible, not the most amount possible, but closer to somewhat in line with what the, kind of the high end of middle of the members of the congregation. So if the congregation is full of really wealthy people, a rabbi will make a much larger salary. If the congregation's full of not so wealthy people, then the rabbi will make kind of that same salary as, a plumber, a bus driver, a what have you. So there's not really one answer to that question. The other question about how synagogues handle large capital expenses, synagogues tend to handle those in a very traditional fundraising model. So very traditional, the board will look at a capital expense. Hopefully it's a planned one. They will often talk to let's say 5 to 10 largest donors. Ideally, this is like very classic capital campaigning. You're gonna, like, let's say your project's gonna be $500,000. Ideally, you're gonna try to see if your top 5 or 10 families are gonna maybe give you, let's say, half of that, maybe more. So that when you go out to the there's usually stages. So you're usually going to go to your wealthiest families, see if they have an interest, maybe go then to the next group. Oh, thank you. What a lovely set of information in chat. There's the Grant Connect information. So going back to capital, it will often be the case, so you go to your richest people first, ask for the most. You'll actually go to your next group, often ask for them privately. It's a lot of individual asks. And then there will come a stage at the end, hopefully when you've got 80 to 90% of it raised, where you're then going out to the whole congregation, asking everyone to give something. That's a pretty classical capital ask. If you're in an emergency situation, the furnace suddenly gives out, it will still then be the case. It may be the case that the rabbi's then going to call 2 or 3 larger donors and see if they'll either maybe make a loan or make a donation to try to help you get through it. Or does someone own a heating and cooling business, and so maybe would their business be willing to donate? There's a lot of that gift in kind slide I talked about earlier of, is there something that someone maybe as part of their business can afford to give you, which will help save you costs and will help them be beneficial. Other questions about grants, about synagogue expenses, about kind of how all this stuff is run? I'm sorry, I'm sitting next to my window, so I know it looks like I've turned into a ghost. I'll have to put a bigger curtain up next time. Well, I think I'm going to thank you guys. You've been amazing, and I've learned a lot from you, and I really hope this has been helpful to you guys as well. Thank you.
Rather, thank you, Anne Rosenfield, for being here with us today and for closing off actually Sound Vision's series of fundraising webinars. I think what a lovely way to close it off with your presentation about fundraising from the perspective of Judaism. And I really loved just witnessing all of those little parallels between fundraising and gift giving in Christianity, Judaism, as well as Islam. So it's also been a great learning opportunity for me as well. I do want to remind everyone that we do periodically, especially after these sort of presentations, send out evaluation forms. So you could feel free to submit any lingering questions through the evaluation. We'll be sure to forward it to Anne, as well as any really feedback on these sort of presentations. I've seen that we've been able to make a number of improvements in Sound Vision's webinars, specifically because of feedback that comes in, which is so valuable. So I do want to, in the interest of time, just close off and on behalf of Sound Vision and Sound Vision Canada, to thank everyone for joining us today, as well as to thank our very insightful presenter, Anne, for the incredible presentation. We do hope that she'll join us in the near future if we have the ability to redo something like this. So Sound Vision is once again an organization that aims to produce content that helps build bridges between neighbors and friends, with an emphasis on youth. Sound Vision is also a pioneer in spiritual Islamic education, and it is one of the umbrella projects included with its flagship projects such as Adam's World, as well as Muslim Fest, which is a festival here in Ontario, Canada. So without further ado, I just want to wish everyone a great rest of the weekend. I hope that everyone stays safe and sound. And we've had some comments coming in complimenting the lovely Zoom bomber and that we were graced with. So I wanted to throw that out there.
Yes, well, Pharaoh works for Cat Treats, so I guess that means he'll get his fair share.
And I hope to see Pharaoh again soon as well. And I'm going to be missing him as soon as I end this presentation. Thank you, everyone. And I'm sure you're taking a look at the nice thank yous to you that are coming in.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Everybody have a lovely day, and do keep the questions coming in to Sound Vision. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Be well.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.